operations and help in artifact recovery on a Titanic expedition that took place earlier this year.
You're in a position to bring back footage, and we have some now, and maybe you'll talk us through some of the images that we see on screen.
Here you have the bow, the famous bow of the wreck coming into view, the camera just panning up across the famous bow that many people recognize from the James Cameron film. Here we have the lights of the mirror submersibles, fantastic, powerful lights, scanning across the debris field where you have a vast area of artifacts lying. There's just a chamber pot there. This is one of the mirror submersibles. They dive in pairs, so there's a safety aspect there to cover that. More debris, more artifacts lying in the bottom. Wine bottles there. We actually recovered some of those this year. Ship's telegraph, we actually recovered that particular one on this year's expedition. Second-class mug. Looking in towards the Marconi room area, those windows were left open, and nobody knows why. Again, more shots of the lights which light up the great depth and darkness down there. A tip-up sink from, I think, a second-class room. A chamber pot coming into view here. A bench from one of the promenade decks. In fact, quite a few of these ends of the benches were recovered this year and in amazing condition. The rust you can see is leaching from some of the rustical and iron parts.
How much is actually left of the ship? We see some of the superstructures is there, but what kind of condition is it in? How much of it's falling away every year, year after year into the sea?
Well, I'm not an expert. I'm only somebody who's been there once. But having seen footage over the years and speaking to the people who have been there, and the Russians have been there most, the main section, the bow section, is still intact. But the superstructure is starting to collapse on itself. And the Russians have said, even in a couple of years since they've been there, they've seen more deterioration. The bow, the middle section of the ship split when she sank, and that created the vast debris field. The stern section is about half a mile away, facing the opposite direction. That's a complete disaster area. It's completely misshapen. The bow section is probably the most recognizable structure remaining of the actual ship itself.
Yeah. The debris field, it's scattered over such a long way, isn't it?
It is.
And you see all sorts of things. Now, are they able to take stuff from the debris field? I mean, well, there's a court ruling, isn't there, as to what can be taken?
There's a court ruling, I understand, about removing artifacts from penetrating the ship. Anything that was recovered in the last few years and this year was recovered just literally lying on the open seabed or just lying loose around the place. There was no actual penetration of the actual ship itself.
Yeah.
So these artifacts are lying there because of when the ship broke up, and they are scattered over a vast area. And more new areas were discovered this year that hadn't been discovered before.
What you were doing, although you've got high-tech equipment, was considered to be quite hazardous. Give us an idea of the kind of pressures that there would be down there. I mean, if you were holed, we're looking even this week at the Kursk rescue mission, which is
that happened while we were there, and the Russians were obviously very upset about that because they could do nothing. They were too far away. But the pressure down there is 6,000 pounds a square inch. Now, to put it in context, we are at what we call 14.7 pounds a square inch at this atmospheric pressure. So it's 400 times the pressure at that depth.
So the submersibles you're in have to be incredibly strong to withstand that.
And if anything goes wrong, you don't even know about it. You'll be gone in milliseconds.
Really, the whole thing, if your submersible collapsed?
Massive implosion, milliseconds.
You're dead.
Gone.
Do you think about that when you're going down?
You do. It does cross your mind every now and then, particularly when once or twice the sub might bump into the wreck and you just suddenly feel the shudder and you get this little awareness of where you are. But there's no point in pondering upon it. You have to trust the technology, and those Russian subs have been there 30 or 40 times over the years.
There was an Irish dimension to your presence on the Titanic, because although you were doing a job of work, you were being contracted to do a job of work, you also took it upon yourself to do something.
Yes, I had no guarantee that I was going to actually visit the wreck. And the wreck is something that I've been fascinated with since it was first discovered in 1985. And I came up with this idea literally about a week before I left the country, that it would be very appropriate for an Irish person, if I got the opportunity, to place a memorial plaque on the bridge of the Titanic to commemorate all those Irish people, as well as the rest of the people who died, but particularly for the reasons that you said at the beginning of the programme. She was built in Ireland, she was built by Irish people, her last port of call was Ireland. And I thought it would be appropriate to commemorate all those Irish people who lost their lives.
And we have some footage of the plaque actually being placed on the Titanic, and it's not like a diver gets out and gently lays it.
No, no, no.
I mean, a diver would be dead.
No, it would be physically impossible. I contacted Michael Martin of Cove Tourism to come up with an idea that the plaque should come from Cove, and he quickly arranged that, and within a few days we had the plaque. The plaque was placed on the outside. This is the plaque here now. It was a fine bronze or brass memorial plaque, as you can see, commemorating all those lost.
RMS Titanic.
It was brought down, and after quite a bit of manipulation by these robotic arms, you can see there trying to lift it out, it was then finally placed in position on the... Now this is all that remains of the bridge. That telemotor there is what the ship's wheel was attached to, and that's all the only physical feature left on the ship's bridge of the Titanic. And that's it there, placed in position for eternity, I hope, to commemorate all those people who lost their lives so horribly.
It is an Irish story, and that plaque is utterly fitting that it should be there. Senan, you've been researching the Irish aboard the Titanic. Just give us some facts and figures.
Well, there were about 113 Irish third-class passengers who joined at Queenstown, as it then was. The Titanic was a very Irish ship, quite apart from being built in Belfast, as we all know. It also had a huge number of Irish amongst the crew, perhaps 60 crew members, literally from top to bottom. We had Irish as the senior surgeon on board. We had an Irishman as the purser on board. We had Irish amongst the able-bodied seamen. And we had Irish down in the stoke holes, in the boilers and in the furnaces.
And the irony is that some of the photographs that have survived of the Titanic, because it only had one voyage, its maiden voyage, were taken by the legendary Father Brown, who scammed his way on, thanks to the White Star Line, from Southampton to Cove.
That's right, and in fact his uncle, who was the Bishop of Cloyne down in Cove, as we now call it, paid for his ticket over, and then he fell in with an American millionaire couple who wanted to pay for his further trip to New York. And when he requested permission of his provincialate in Dublin, he was told to get off the ship immediately. It docked in Queenstown, and a good thing he did too. These are some of his pictures here. That's the grand staircase. The cherub holding up the lamp at the bottom of the grand staircase, very intricately carved. Father Brown took, that's a wonderful picture of T.W. Macaulay, who's the physical education instructor. He's at the rowing machine, which was, that's in the gymnasium. That's a chap called Parr at the back, who was part of the Harland and Wolff guarantee group, and he was drowned. He left a wife and child. Father Brown was given Mr. Macaulay's card, and kept it as a memento afterwards.
There's a man called Eugene Daly who actually testified to seeing passengers being shot. Will you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, Eugene Daly didn't testify before any inquiry. There was only one Irish person ever called before any of the two inquiries that were held, one in America and one in Britain. The American inquiry only called a couple of third-class passengers, of which only one was Irish, and the British inquiry saw fit to call no passengers whatsoever, no steerage-class passengers, certainly. Eugene Daly was one of the 113 Irish steerage who boarded at Queenstown, and he was a very popular figure. He was playing the uilleann pipes as the tender was casting off from the Deepwater Quay anchor departure point, going out to the Titanic, which had moored just outside Roach's Point. And he played Ireland's Lament and A Nation Once Again as the tender was going out. And he was one of the great figures of jollity on board in the steerage section, where there were parties virtually every night. Very well represented in the Cameron movie, where you have Gaelic Storm playing all of that. And Eugene Daly tells a story of how the final chaos unfolded, and he managed to climb up empty lifeboat davits with the useless ropes hanging down. He managed to grab a hold of one and climb his way up to the top deck, the boat deck. Most of the boats had gone, and he rushed all the way forward to the first-class area, and in fact he saw officers there trying to restrain the crowd and firing first warning shots and then shooting dead some of the passengers who were trying to get on board.
People were incredibly desperate. One Irishman managed to make good his escape by disguising himself as a woman.
That's right. There's only one person who has ever admitted to passing themselves off as a woman in order to get into a lifeboat. As you say, the great catch cry was women and children first. On the port side, there was a great deal of chaos around lifeboat number 14, and an Irishman named Edward Ryan from Emly in County Tipperary, he decided that he would put a towel over his head and dress himself up in his raincoat to make it look like a dress. And he fashioned a very stiff walk, as he later told his parents in a letter, and passed through this cordon that was being organized by the officers. And they mistook him for a woman. He managed to get down into it.
He wasn't very popular for so doing, was he?
Well, subsequently, there were great bonfires lit to his survival in his home place when news emerged that he had been saved because he was very popular. But subsequently, some of the rumors started to come out about how he had dressed as a woman and so on. And of course, people's attitudes towards him turned to a certain degree of callousness and indifference. And he had to spend his last days in England, even though he wanted to return home to Ireland.
It's a very sad story, but I'm sure it's replicated lots of times in different forms on the Titanic. And this is Thomas and Hannah O'Brien, who eloped pretending to be married when they were not, but she was 5 months pregnant.
That's right.
He didn't survive.
Yeah, a very tragic story, very much of the time. You know, there was no question of staying home and trying to make the best of it when someone became pregnant, because the baby would have to be given up for adoption. There is Hannah O'Brien with the baby that was born 5 months after she landed in New York, having been rescued by the Carpathia from a lifeboat. She was pregnant with that child, you see, Marion, 4 months pregnant on board the Titanic, and the man she was eloping with, Thomas O'Brien, it's not quite clear whether they were married or not, but he had to hand his lover, his wife, into a lifeboat, knowing that he would never see his child to be.
There is also, if you like, an amusing side to one of the stories. There was a guy called Joseph Dawson who ultimately went on to live and be buried in Newfoundland. But the DiCaprio figure in the Cameron movie is Jack Dawson. And what's happening today to Joseph Dawson's grave?
Well, Joseph Dawson, by coincidence, happened to have the same first initial and surname as the Leonardo DiCaprio character in the movie, which was Jack Dawson. It was Jack and Rose, the starstruck lovers. And Cameron, when he was making the movie, didn't know that there was actually a Dawson on board the Titanic when she went down. And this is the Dawson. He's a Dubliner. He died in the sinking. And in fact, we have good evidence that he was amongst a group of stokers who were finally released from their duties in trying to keep the fire stoked down below, who went up onto the poop deck and with a number of other firemen took off his shoes to try and meet what was going to be the final plunge. The boats had long since gone. And in fact, he died in the freezing cold water, and his body was recovered by one of the search vessels. He was then interred in Halifax, in Nova Scotia, where he lay, largely unmourned and forgotten for many years, until now his grave has become a place of pilgrimage for.
They all think he's Jack Dawson, as in Leonardo DiCaprio.
And there are teenage girls who are leaving keys to their hotel rooms and cinema stubs and pictures of Leonardo on this grave of this Dubliner who would just happen to be on board.
The extraordinary thing is that it's 88 years since, more than 88 years since the Titanic went down. 1,500 people, more than that, died, but there are still some survivors alive. And we have one of them with us tonight, and I want you to welcome, please, Milvina Dean. Milvina, where are you? Milvina, here we are. Now, will you welcome? Thank you. Yes, I'll hold you. Don't worry. Now, if you come round and sit beside me. Now,
thank you.
It has to be said that you don't remember a lot about that maiden voyage of the Titanic.
I don't remember anything. I was a bit young.
How old were you at the time?
9 weeks.
9 weeks old.
Yes.
A little babe in arms.
Little babe in arms, yes.
Your father perished
Yes.
on the Titanic, so you, of course, never could know him.
No.
What did your mother tell you of what happened that time?
I never heard anything at all until I was 8 years old. And my mother was going to get married again, and then she thought she'd better tell me about my father. But otherwise, what had happened otherwise, she would never say anything about it. She was quite heartbroken. They'd only been married 4 years, and he was a very handsome man. And she just told me what happened that night. And that's all. She said that night, I was in bed, and I was 9 weeks, and my brother was under 2. We were in bed, and they suddenly heard a crash. So my father said, we were third class. And so my father said he'd go up on deck and find what had happened. And he said, apparently the ship had struck an iceberg, get the children out of bed and up on deck as quickly as possible. And that's what happened. And I think that's what saved us. I think my father being so quick, because we were third class, and first and second class went first.
Why were you going to America?
We were emigrating because we had relations there, and they said there was much more opportunity for my father in America than in England. So he was going to open a tobacconist shop in Kansas.
But it was not to be.
It was not to be, no, and you know.
What happened to your family? I mean, you had to come back to Britain. What happened to them? I mean, was there compensation to your family for the loss of the breadwinner?
Our schooling was paid for my brother and myself. My mother had a small pension until she married again. And we stayed on a farm for, when we went back, we went to my mother's home, my grandfather's, and lived on the farm until, as I say, I was 8 years old. And then a vet went to see one of my grandfather's cows, saw my mother, and married her. And so then we moved from the farm into Southampton.
Now, over the last few years, because of the movie, The Titanic,
yeah.
There's been a lot of interest in The Titanic. Have you been in any way preoccupied by The Titanic all your life, or is it only in recent years?
No, only in recent years, only after they found the wreck. After they found the wreck, the Americans suddenly found me. And I went to, it started off, I went to America. And then, of course, other people heard about me, so I was invited to various places in the world. And so I've been around quite a lot.
How do you regard the Titanic? I mean, do you regard it as a sacred place, a burial place that should not be disturbed, or are you happy that at this stage it should be explored?
I'm happy if they take all the artifacts off the seabed, but not so much going on the ship, on the wreck. Because I think where my father probably isn't on the wreck now, but I just don't know. So I wouldn't be happy really if they went on the wreck.
And the kind of exploration that Rory was doing, I mean, going down and looking around and...
Well, he didn't go on the wreck, did he?
Rory?
Did you go on the wreck, Rory?
Well, we placed the memorial plaque on the bridge.
Oh, of course you did, you say so, yes. Yeah.
Isn't it true, Rory, that there's a difference between picking up stuff from the debris field and some of the stuff that you described in your Titanic diary on the RTE website, such as twisting stuff off and stuff that was held by 88-year-old wiring, for instance. I mean, there's a difference, isn't there, between picking up stuff that's just been left or has fallen from the sinking and going aboard the ship and plucking stuff off. Do you think?
I would think that removing anything like that, because it was just hanging there, eventually it would fall off anyway. So it was just a question of possibly doing it before its time. And again, these are artifacts that people are very interested in seeing. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
You actually have something which comes from the debris field. It's only a small thing, and it's not an artifact as such.
As such, no.
What is it?
One of my jobs was removing the artifacts from the recovery baskets. And every now and then, there was an awful lot of mud and muck, and I would clean out looking for small pieces. Occasionally, I would find small pieces of bead and crystalware. And every now and then, I just wiped my hands in my pockets. And when I was home cleaning out my old overalls, there were bits of Titanic, pieces of rust, and a few bits of coal that actually came from it. So there we have something that's been on the seabed for 88 years, which is quite extraordinary.
How do you regard that kind of stuff, Lovina? Does it affect you in any way?
Not really. I think if I'd been old enough to understand about it, I think it might have done. And also, I can always see the other person's point of view, which is sometimes rather irritating. I think this is a part of history.
Yeah.
Because people are so very interested in the Titanic and all about it that, I don't know, to go right on there. But have you been right on there, Rory?
Well, we were all around the bridge area.
You see, it's impossible really for any diver to get onto the wreck because the pressure is such that you can't, in any kind of a diving suit, put up with the pressure. So the closest they can get is with these little mini submarines and then robot arms, which can,
Good
Place
state
them
of
on.
things.
but no human hand can actually get onto that wreck.
Therefore, it isn't quite so bad, I don't think.
You don't think it's so bad?
I
There's
don't, no,
another
I don't think.
Something else that happens here, Pat. I mean, sometimes the submersibles go so close to the wreck that they're actually knocking stuff off it. They're knocking off the crow's nest. The telephones have gone missing in that respect. Davits have been knocked off. So, you know, there was a ruling by a United States court which claims to have jurisdiction over the wreck earlier this summer that it couldn't be penetrated. And I think at least that there is a difference between picking up stuff from the debris field and going so close to the wreck that you're actually harming it or bringing it apart. I mean,
Yeah.
I appreciate their views on this point.
In the front row is Michael Martin. Michael, how are you? We get a microphone to you. You're involved in a Titanic venture in Cove, isn't that so?
That's right, yeah. I run the Titanic Trail in Cove, and basically it's a heritage walk that guides people around the town, unveiling to them all the direct links with Titanic in the town. All of the architecture of the town, the piers that the passengers left from, the streets that they walked, and indeed the buildings that they would have ate, drank and slept in are all still there. Cove has a unique architectural heritage in that sense, and the walking tour that I do unveils all of this to people, and it shows places like where Father Brown would have subsequently showed his fantastic photographs.
There was one particular family who suffered loss more than any other, wasn't that so?
Yes, would have been the family of Margaret Rice and her 5 children, and they would have been steerage passengers that left from Cove, and she was lost together with the 5 children. And many authors, including Sainan, feel that she would have made it up on deck, but that there was probably no lifeboats left because she was found in the water. But she left from Cove, and the building that she left from, and indeed the pier that she walked out across, is still there. And in something that you can identify with very easily with an Irish family, she had intended originally to travel apparently in May of 1912. But a neighbour said to her, you know, she was a widow, and he said, look, I'm going in April. Why don't you come along in April and I'll help you with the children? And she subsequently, she changed her plans because of that and left Cove on the 12th of April and was lost together with her 5 children.
5 children. There are so many stories, and we could talk all night about people. The fellow who was on board ship as a seaman, came from Southampton to Queenstown, Cove, jumped ship.
He used it as a taxi.
He used it as a taxi. He just got his passage home for nothing, and then says, I had a premonition that it was going to sink. And so instead of being pilloried for jumping ship, he actually ended up some sort of a hero. You've lived with this all your life, from the age of 8 when you realized it.
No, I haven't really. I mean, nobody's ever taken any notice of me
Until
at all until
the
they found the wreck. Until they found the wreck.
Until they found the wreck.
And then when they found the wreck, I said I went to America and I've been around. But when they found the movie, then it became absolutely hectic.
I can imagine.
Yes.
I should say here, though, Pat, that it's not quite true that nobody made a fuss of her, because on the ship back, she was the Titanic baby, and passengers were rationed to 1 minute apiece holding up the Titanic baby. And there are photographs of that in the 1970s.
Oh, yes.
You were the Titanic baby.
I was a Titanic baby, and I was allowed to be held by first and second class passengers, of course, only for 10 minutes each. And I even cried.
I wonder, I've often wondered this about people who've made great escapes, but I mean, have you felt lucky all your life that you lived at all to see the great things you've seen?
Well, only recently. I hadn't thought about it at all until recently, when there's so much about the Titanic, and then I thought, yes, how lucky I am.
But
to
you'd never have
survive.
known, I suppose, one way or the other, had you lost your life at that stage.
No.
Malvina, thank you very much for being with us tonight. It's really good of you at this great age. You're 88
Don't say
years.
this great age,
Well,
please.
it is. I would hope to make it
I
that
don't
far.
want to
I
be
feel
that
very lucky
great
if I did.
age.
Well, you're a terrific woman. Malvina Dean, thank you so much. And Rory and Senan Maloney. Thank you very much. Okay, we've one last little bit of business to do, and that is, earlier we were talking to the 5 students who are living in flat 54, which is somewhere in Dublin, location unknown. They're trying to keep it a secret. It can be viewed on the Oxygen, the www.oxygen.ie site, which we will switch on right now.